Hi, I'm Seth David, and I'd like to welcome you to our course on BillQuick. I'm very excited to bring you this course. I've been working with the company on this product for quite a while now. We're going to take a look at four major areas of this product. We're going to look at how to enter time and expenses. We're going to look at the project management aspects of this program. We're going to take a look at billing, of course, so you know what to do with this information once you've gathered it all. And finally, we're going to take a look at the QuickBooks integration. I can't wait to get into this. Follow along with me. Let's take a look at what BillQuick can do for you and for your clients. Time and expenses is a big hang-up for a lot of small businesses. Specifically, how do we keep track of it? How do we gather that information? I remember years ago when I was working through a temp agency, and this was before computers were where they are today, for sure, and I would get these carbon copies that I would have to fill out each week for where I worked and how many hours I spent on each one. And I remember it was grueling. I dreaded having to fill out my time because it was such a miserable experience, and I don't have very good handwriting, so that made it even more challenging for me. Fast forward a few years until a few years ago, what were we all doing? All companies were using spreadsheets pretty much to gather information about time and expenses. And what would happen is as follows. I would fill out my time sheet, I would fill out my expense report, and I would send these spreadsheets in to somebody at your company who would then have to re-enter this information into their accounting system, such as QuickBooks. What happens is now there are two opportunities where errors can be made. One when I'm entering my own time, and a second when somebody else is entering my time. And for that matter, it's just highly inefficient when the same data is being entered twice. So enter BillQuick. BillQuick solves this problem on a lot of levels. Bottom line, I have one person entering in their time one time. Then I can have another person reviewing that time to make sure it's right, but no double data entry. So we're eliminating extra time and extra effort and extra chances of error by simply providing a platform where anybody can access it from their own computer to enter in their time and any other information we need described about the work they did, the time they spent on it, and what expenses they might have incurred in the process. We're going to take a look now at what it looks like when you're entering time and expenses into BillQuick. Stay tuned and we'll show you what this looks like. When you're using BillQuick to enter time, you can establish who is a user in who's an actual BillQuick user. You can list all of your employees, but only establish that certain ones are BillQuick users, and these, of course, would be the people who you need to have the ability to enter time. So this is important to understand, because the next question that's going to come up is, well, what do they have access to? If I give my employee the ability to enter time on their projects, do they have, I have a lot of my accounting information here. I don't want them having access to all of that. So not to worry, all of this can be controlled from within BillQuick. So let's take a look at some of this first. Let's go view our employees, for example, and we'll find one that's a BillQuick user. And the way you know that is right here, it's checked off where it says BillQuick user. Funny how that works. And then over here you'll see the drop down that says security, time and expense only. So Alan Marcello only has access to entering time and expenses. I could give him other access. I could give him full access if I wanted to, or manager level access if that's something that I would need him to be able to do. Now, what does that look like? I want to show you something else. Settings. Under settings and then user preferences, we can establish under options here that we can hide the features that a user doesn't have access to. So when I check that off and save it, you'll see what happens. I'm going to now log in as Alan Marcello. So we'll go File, Log In. I'm now logged in as Alan Marcello. And notice I have many fewer options here across the top. Even within accounting, Alan has the ability to reconcile accounts. Now that may be something that was specifically assigned to him, and we'll take a look at how you can do that. Under settings, he has his own user preferences, and over here under options, he can decide if he wants to hide the features he does not have access to. Notice what happens if he unchecks this and saves it. What it does is it expands all the menus, but they're grayed out. So it shows him everything that theoretically could be available there, but again, it's grayed out. So for this purpose, of course, we recommend using that option that hides it, because what's the sense in seeing what you can't have access to? It just lets you know that it's there, though, that there isn't anything wrong with the program. So this is what happens, and this I think is important to see because it gives the end user of BillQuick that assurance that just because a person has been given access to enter time and expenses doesn't mean they're going to be able to access everything that's in BillQuick. In fact, quite the opposite. We're going to be able to be very specific about what they do and do not have access to. Now let's log back in as the supervisor. I am now logged in as the supervisor. So now we know how to establish whether or not an employee, or a vendor for that matter, is a BillQuick user such that they can be invited in to be able to enter time and expenses. And we know how to make sure that their access is restricted to being able to do just that. And if you go into your security settings, you can be that much more specific about their, what they do have access to. So that's something for another lesson on another day, but just know that the option is there. For most of people's purposes, it's going to be sufficient to know that you can choose from those drop downs, and I'll show you what that looks like one more time. If we go look at employees, if I could actually click accurately, if we go to employees, and again over here under security, we have the choices, and these are generally defined roles, but we can go into the security settings and define other roles or change the settings that are related to these roles. So just know that you can do that. The options are there. So that takes care of the sort of user security and roles and how to establish what the person has access to. Now let's take a look at how to enter time. But before I go into this, this is one of those times where it's a good time to pause and review that. If you have BillQuick open, log in as the supervisor, establish that somebody is a BillQuick user, log in as that user, and make sure that you understand how those roles work and how to change that one preference in terms of whether or not they can see what they have access to and what they don't have access to. Once you feel comfortable, then you can resume the video and move on to the next segment here, which is going to be on entering time. BillQuick gives you several different ways of entering your time. There are actually 3 timesheet views, and then there's the timer which you can use if you're actually engaged in the act of an activity and want to start and stop a clock such that you can record your time and describe what you did. In any of these views, you're going to be able to enter the same information if you're looking at things from the perspective of an employee. You're going to be able to select the employee whose time is being entered. You're going to be able to choose which customer, which project, of course the amount of time you spent, and you're going to be able to describe details of what you did. What's also nice about BillQuick is contextually, right where you're entering in the time, you can add journals or memos with more detailed descriptions about what took place there. That already is a feature that's not available in QuickBooks alone. So right there is one example of something that BillQuick will help you do that you couldn't do otherwise. Now we're ready to look at entering time. By this point, you've established that you understand how to set up the user roles and security so that you can make sure people only have access to the things you want them to be able to have access to, and so on and so forth. So now we're ready to start entering time. For that matter, we're ready for our employees or subcontractors to be able to enter their time. So where will they go? They'll come right here to where it says time-expense. And then within that, we see the enter time option. And as you may very well have seen in the written portion of this, we have several options for how to get time entered. We're going to look at the sheet view first. The sheet view gives us a certain way of looking at how to enter time, and some people might like this better. The other thing is over here under View By, with the sheet view I can view it by employee, project, or vendor. And as you're going to see in a minute with the other screens, you can't see it by project, you can only see it by employee or vendor. So if I choose by project and I want to enter time by project, notice then I have to enter an employee ID so I can establish whose time is being entered here. And it might be that it's me. So I can go over here to More, and this is where I can set a default activity code or project ID so that when I'm entering time, and this is a user setting, it will always default to that. Because if I'm only ever working on one project all month, then that just saves me some time when I'm entering time. So back over on the sheet view, most of the time we're going to be entering it either as the employee or as the vendor, and that's probably how we're going to be looking at it. So if I go back to choosing by employee, and let's pick on Curtis James here, then we've got the period set at a single week, and this is the period including December 3rd, 2014, when I happen to be recording this. So Very straightforward in terms of how to enter the time. I enter the date, I enter the project ID, which project am I working on, and by the way, over here in the field chooser, I can choose what I'm able to see. So maybe I don't like entering by project ID because I don't remember what number goes in front of it, but I know the name. So I can choose that in the field chooser here, and then close it, and then I believe we can move this over here. We sure can. So now instead of entering the project ID, because I may not remember, I might remember Staples Center, right? And so whichever one of these I enter, BillQuick will look up the other one, so I have it. Then I'll choose an activity code, and then over here I can enter my time, and I can enter it in either decimal or time format. So I can say, I spent 5 hours and 30 minutes on this, and as soon as I tab away, BillQuick does the math and converts it to a decimal format for me. Then I can enter a description. And from the screen down here, I can expand on that and say, you know what, I need more details in this description. And you'll notice that if I select any field for this record, right, the entire row is the record and each column is a field. If I select any field, that same memo is available to me. That's not always going to be the case. Let's look at the next way. And the other thing, by the way, before I move on, is over here we can establish whether it's billable. And then this is where we can show if the memo exists. So it'll be checked off if there's a memo. So it won't let me uncheck that because I have a memo. If I delete the memo, then notice that goes away. Let's go to the next choice, the simple time card view. There's one particular view that I prefer, and it's called the Simple Time Card View. And I think most of you are going to like this best anyway because you're going to find the screen is very familiar. It looks very much like the timesheet form that QuickBooks provide. Here, as you can see, and as I mentioned, you can only choose view it by employee or vendor. So let's go to Curtis James again. And you can always click refresh up here in case you're not sure if you're seeing everything, the most up to date. Now, let's take a look at what happens if I want to enter a memo on something like this. Down here, I can't enter anything here. I have to have the actual time entry itself selected on the day, and then I can put details here. So in this particular data entry screen for entering time, I have to have the time selected. Notice if I click back on description, the memo is gone. But if I click here, there it is again. So this screen only allows me to access the memo as it's tied into the actual time entry here. That's just important to know. The rest of it, again, is pretty straightforward. I'll choose my project name and ID. I have my field chooser here. I'm a little more limited in terms of what I'm able to choose to see or not to see. Basically, I have 3 choices because everything else is required to be entered when I'm entering time, right? I need to know the project ID. I need to know the activity ID or the description, and so on and so forth. And over here, important to note that if I wanted to enter in 3 hours, 30 minutes, it won't let me do it. I have to use the decimal format when I'm entering time here. So that's also important to note. Other than that, pretty straightforward. QuickBooks users are going to recognize this screen because it looks a whole lot like the timesheet form that QuickBooks provides when you're entering time in QuickBooks. Let's look at the next option, the calendar view. The calendar view may appeal to some people, it may not. You can, again, choose to view by either employee or project, but not by vendor, notice. So let's go find Curtis James. We're picking on him. And here's all his stuff. So the period includes 12/1. So we're looking at starting 12/1, and then notice it goes out a few days. It goes out for the rest of the calendar week. And in here, what it does is it condenses the entry. So I have a day, and within each day I have the hours and the activity code. And of course the project is laid out here. Notice there's no field chooser. This is all that I have access to when I'm in this screen. Now let's go over here to filter, because here's where you have some other choices in terms of what you can see or how you can limit what you can see, and it'll turn these filters on. So you can establish the filters and then use this button here to turn those filters on and off. So even though you've established filters, you can still turn them off so it won't restrict your view. Also important to know. But notice here there's no option, for example, to say, hey, show me the weekends, right? You're still in this view, you can only see weekdays. Again, important to note. And that, my friends, is pretty much all the options you have in terms of straight data entry other than the timer. So let's take a look at the timer. And this is going to be something we're going to need to spend some time on. So before I move on to looking at the timer for a way of entering time, this would be a good point at which to stop, pause the video. In your own copy of BillQuick, which you've by now no doubt downloaded and installed, at least the trial version, make sure you can access these views and make sure it's very clear to you how you can enter in time in each of these views and understand what the limitations are of each view and where you're perhaps not limited in terms of that. So go back if you need to catch up, and then when you're ready to, you can resume this video. The timer in BillQuick is going to come in handy for probably obvious reasons. If you're sitting at your desk and you're about to begin a task, then you bring up the timer and you hit the start button. Before doing that, you'll probably want to populate it with the right project, the right customer, and any other information that's relevant. Then you click start, perform your task, and as soon as you're finished, you can click stop. Makes sense, it's pretty straightforward. There's some other nice bells and whistles you're going to see on this, such as the ability to have it ding at once every hour or after a set period of time so that you're reminded, for example, to make sure that you did in fact remember to hit the stop button if you need to. The next and final option for how you're going to enter or capture time, might be a better word to describe it, is the timer. So let's take a look at this. And I saved this for its own segment because it can be quite detailed. So let's take a look. Again, we're going to open up the timer. And the timer is here in the background, which needs to be brought up. There we go. There we go. So here I have an unsaved entry. Let's just click start and watch what happens. So when I click start, actually, that reestablishes or starts up this timer again. So if you've got time logged here, then be careful because clicking start while something is selected will start that timer. At this point, you should hit new if you want to log a completely new and separate time entry. And there's a lot going on here, and that's because you can do a lot with this. It's really cool, actually. You've got some filters. Over here, you can click this arrow to collapse the detail. And notice here, you can tell it to chime every 1 hour, so you know when you've spent an hour or whatever time interval you choose to put there. Or you can have it beep after so many hours. After so many hours, not every, so many hours, and so on. And of course, if you wanted to, you can go in here and manually override the timer itself by simply saying, hey, I worked 1.5 hours on this project, right? However you want to do it, you can do it. So that's the adjusted time. But let's say we're not doing that. If you want to start the timer, you can hit start. Probably a good idea to fill in this information first because you don't really want to charge somebody for the time it took you to say who you are, what you did, and where you did it. So you fill in. We'll pick on Curtis again, and then we'll go, let's pick on Green Thumb, and then we'll choose an activity. We'll say we did the accounting on it. And the project name is Green Thumb Starter System. And here, of course, I can write my detailed memo, and I've even got some formatting options here when I click in there. And I can choose billable, right, if I plan on having this be able to be billed back to a customer. I can do that. And once I've got this information in, then it's probably appropriate to hit the start button and let it start timing. And then I can go on about my business. So then I go open some other screens and go do what I've got to do. Now, let's say I come back now and it's 1.5 hours later. All right, so instead of me actually running this clock for 1.5 hours, let's just go put it in. I spent 1.5 hours. And I want to come back later. I know that I have more to do on this. I'm not done. I don't want to necessarily save this time, but I do want it logged. What I can do is click this option here that says remember. And what that allows me to do is I can close it, but then what happens here is if I go to close this, it's going to ask me, it's going to say I haven't logged the time. Do I want to save it? So I'm going to say don't save, and I'm going to say don't save again. And then what I can do is, and this brings up the final option that we see in the enter time area, is I can open unsaved timers. When I choose that, it will bring up the time entry for any of those screens where I've checked off remember. So you have to check off remember. If you don't have remember checked off and you close everything and say don't save, it's lost. It's gone. You can't get it back. So really important, if you're closing it and you know you want to get back to the data entry later on and add to this or add details or continue by clicking start again. Because remember, this isn't logging the starting and ending times, it's just logging the amount of time that you spent, and that's really important, which enables you to just log the total time that you spent. Now, if it's important to you that you're able to establish, let's say that I didn't just do the work on this day, but I did it from 1 to 2 o'clock, and then I stopped, and then I went back and I worked on it from 3 to 4 o'clock, then you'll want to you'll want to do a whole new time entry. So you'll want to save this and then open up a new timer for that, so that you can be that specific about not just how much time you spent, but when that time was spent. That's an important distinction to be aware of. But the bottom line is I can log as many timers in a given day for the same project as properly reflects how I actually spent that day working on that project, right? I might work on the same project 6 different times throughout the day for a half an hour at a time, but at different times, so I may log different timers for that. So important to understand how this works, right? I know that traditionally when I log my time and I bill my clients for it, I like to show them that I worked on this day, I started at this time, I stopped at this time. And so I might have several entries for the same day if I started and stopped several times in the same day. Or I might actually say I started here, stopped here, started again. Let's say, for example, I took lunch and then finished for the day at the final time. So these are important considerations to think about in terms of how you want to log your time. At the end of the day, what BillQuick is really set up to do is to log the total time that you spent on a particular day, on a particular project, performing a particular activity code. And that's the deal. That's what you get. There is one more thing that we need to talk about in terms of tracking time and expenses with BillQuick, and that is the expenses part of tracking time and expenses. We've left this for last because it's short and easy and simple. So if we go to time-expense, just like we have with everything else so far, you'll see this choice here, enter expense, and you'll see there's 2 ways in which we can enter expenses. One is the expense log, and the other is the simple expense log. So let's start with the expense log and see what that has to offer. And we'll click refresh. We've got it by employee. We can also look at it by project or vendor. Notice the screen is very similar to the time entry sheet view screen, right? If I go to the sheet view, it's got the same basic layout. And as with that screen, we're going to come in here, we're going to enter a date, we're going to enter a project ID, we're going to enter an expense ID, we're going to enter a description, and then we're going to enter units, which would be a quantity, and a cost in order to come up with the amount. And that is pretty much all there is. We can do a markup percentage here in case we're marking it up for purposes of billing it back to a client. That's pretty much what you need to know about entering expenses. Of course, you can put memos in here, right? So you can put a memo in here describing more information about that expense. Maybe you need to explain why it's being entered as a reimbursable, right? So this way we can reimburse Curtis James for it and then decide whether or not we want to bill it back to a client. Now notice we do have the billable column here, and we've got these checked off, meaning of course that it is something we expect to be billing back to the client. We have the field chooser. Again, it's the same layout. So over here we can decide which columns we see and access while we are entering our expense. And as with time, we'll be able to submit it once we feel that we're done and we're ready for it to be reviewed. And then later on, somebody can review and approve it. Now, I have the approve button here because I'm in here as the supervisor. The employee who's entering his or her time or expenses will not have the ability to approve it. They'll be able to submit it, and then once it's submitted, you can even set up, and this comes up perhaps in another course on BillQuick that we'll do down the road, but you can set up the workflow. You can set it up so that somebody's notified when the time is submitted. A reviewer, let's say a project manager, who can then get in and review the time and approve it. And once it's approved, then that means it's ready to be A, paid back to to the employee in cases where they're getting reimbursed, and B, billed back to the client if it's the case that we're going to be billing these expenses back to the client. Otherwise, as I mentioned right at the beginning of this lesson, it may simply be a matter of wanting to compare the expenses with our budget for the project to make sure that we haven't gone over and eaten into our profits. As always, if you have any questions, please use the answers forum at schoolofbookkeeping.com here and post your questions. The answers that we provide may help others. And look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Make sure you review this and understand this thoroughly, because next we're going to take a look at project management, and a lot of that rests on understanding everything we've gone over here so that you understand how the time and expenses got here. Then you'll understand what to do with it and how we use that information in terms of the bigger picture project management aspect of what BillQuick provides. Look forward to seeing you in that lesson. Now that you had a good thorough look at how to enter time and expenses in BillQuick, it's time to put this information to use. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at how to use that information in the project management area so that we can make sure we stay profitable on all of our projects.